Well, that's amazing. Good evening, friends. It's been quite a long time. This is coming after a week in which I've had my faith in technology thoroughly shaken because one of my accounts was hacked. And when it happens to you, you read about it in the papers, you hear stories about it, but it's not supposed to happen to real people like yourself. And when it does, it really feels as if somebody's been taking long lens photos of you in the privacy of your living room. It's very, very unsettling, quite apart from the reputational damage it has the potential of doing. So, but the beauty of this experience is that when you're put under so much pressure, you reach a stage where you reach the effort moment where you think, oh, well, look, damn this for a game of soldiers. I'm just going to get on with the rest of my life, which has brought me to the point where, for the first time, I'm streaming live from my browser on Restream to my platforms like Facebook, my groups, and so on and so forth. So I hope you pick this up. If you do, by all means, like, comment, tick, somehow indicate that you're connecting with the stream so that it'll encourage me to do more. Now, tonight I'm going to talk about something that has been bubbling up in me for quite a long time, which is the idea that, and this is not just for Africans, everybody is sick and tired of the world in which we're living at the moment. Cost of living is too high. We got too much legislation going on around our personal liberties. We have too much censorship going on with people telling us not only what we're supposed to think, but what we can and cannot say in public. And a host of other things, international conflicts. I mean, I need not mention Gaza. That the fact that the casualty toll is north of 30,000, most of them being women and children. I mean, it's frankly too horrific to even contemplate. And I've done several programs about that on Press TV and other platforms. So you reach a stage where everybody has decided, more or less, that we want a change in our world. But here's the kicker: everybody desires change. But the problem is, everybody expects somebody else to make the change so they can enjoy the change that they want to see. Now, I'm talking probably mostly to an African audience, but Africans mustn't think for a moment that I'm having a pop at them. This is a global phenomenon. Why do I say that? In the West, in China, in another very powerful economy, which is the Japanese, people are very much herded into streams of thinking, streams of behavior over which they don't seem to have that much control. It's ironic and shocking in the West because the West has always prided itself on its democracies, in fact, goes around the world, making the introduction of democracies like we run in the West now the sine qua non for aid money, for a proper working relationship with themselves. It's literally made conditional for the advancement of other countries. But even here, these problems are happening. Human beings are being very much herded together, and people don't have the freedom to wriggle, change, and express themselves. In China, of course, you have the Communist Party of China, bless them. They do what they do, and culturally also it's reinforced. They are a very kind of uniform group, as far as we can tell. so that when they introduce new laws, social edicts, and so on, everybody falls in line. Of course, in China, they have a secondary level of enforcement of these edicts, laws, and social ways of being, because they literally have a social scoring system. And if your social score isn't good enough, things like intra, that is within your own country, you can't do long distance train journeys, let alone fly abroad or travel abroad. And you acquire what you might call demerits for not being sufficiently socially scored. Japan is a culture which is, it's really, how can I put this? It prides itself on the obedience of its people. Now, of course, obedience has two faces. One is that of discipline. Like in Japan, there are major sporting events, and afterwards, the spectators pick up after themselves. They just that organized. Children are taught in kindergarten from an early stage in their lives to keep their classrooms clean and so on. That is the kind of discipline it leads to. But of course, there is a tax, what I call an intellectual and spiritual tax associated with those levels of discipline, because it really makes people uniform in attitude, if not necessarily belief, but certainly in behavior. Everybody seems to do the same thing. So even though in these countries technology is legendary, um, the tech is what changes, but the mentality of the people, the hearts of the people, doesn't seem much to change. So if I say that these are problems that Africa is facing, please don't for a moment think that I'm having a pop at Africans. This is a global phenomenon. But I can only speak about Africa because I feel as if culturally and spiritually I have more adjacency, maybe perhaps more uh, authority to speak about those things based on my upbringing and background. Now, in the West, we suffer problems such as the denial, redaction, and total kind of sweeping under the carpet of vast swathes of history. People will only do what they know. And if you haven't been taught something that happened in the past, you can't believe or know that it exists. So in the West, we tend to have kind of a denial of the histories around colonialism and empire. And of course, if you don't know what the West has done abroad in the past, you can kind of halfway be forgiven for repeating those same errors in different ways further down the line. Although today, not knowing something is a choice you make, because owing to the internet, a lot of the information is available. So if you want to know something, it's out there for you to know. Still, vis-a-vis the Western Africa, there is this kind of air of, um, again, I don't want to sound or appear insulting, but there is definitely this air of supremacism, which suggests that they know best and they're going to come to Africa and tell Africans what they ought to do. And the only way Africans can wriggle out of this is by illegal means. Vide the coups that have taken place in places like Niger. The only way they could kick out the French influence was by acting in a way which was illegal and unconstitutional, i.e., they had to perform a coup. So some of these ways of behaving have been hardwired into systems. And of course, the average person in the West doesn't understand the minutiae of these things, but has gotten used to the wealth that it's generated for their use. And so, you know, most people feel as if, well, it's got nothing to do with me. Uh, What's missing in that sentence is I'm just enjoying the largesse, the profit that derives from ways of behaving which are somewhat didactic, somewhat controlling, and so on. So I call it the Somme mentality. The Battle of the Somme happened, I think it was 1916. I know it started July the 1st and ended in November. And after 430,000 British casualties, the Allied lines had moved just 10 miles. This was the most expensive military intervention or military adventure that the Brits ever had. And I just know that since I was a little boy, the images of the Somme with soldiers getting up, walking across no man's land, preceded by a rolling artillery barrage, and then the Germans hiding in their trenches. And then when the barrage was lifted, they just came up there and picked up. By then, the machine gun had been invented. They just used to wipe the people and mow them down. And yet, those soldiers just kept on going. That's what I call the Somme mentality. You're being ordered to do something by your cohort, by your group, and you will follow it whether it leads to your loss of life or not. By the way, of the 430,000 casualties from the Battle of the Somme, which lasted a few months, a third of them died. Well, it's frankly horrific. So the there have been other far more recent examples of this kind of what I call the Somme mentality, herd mentality way of thinking, where, for example, when we had this awful experience with COVID globally, um, many people took the medication that was prescribed for them, um, not because they wanted to, but out of loyalty to the group. They were actually, in their minds, acting in a high minded way, just as the soldiers who walked across no man's land to attack the Germans at the Somme were acting in a self sacrificial, high minded way to protect the interests of their nation. And of course, we now know that there have been many adverse consequences. And we now know that many of the promises that were made about safety and efficacy have actually, you know, been proven to be less than correct. We still have issues in this country around class. The United Kingdom is, I think, probably the only country in the world in which you can tell a person's class by the way in which they speak the native language. And whereas the general standard of living has risen so that everybody has enough, more or less, to live by, and we have a social welfare system, um, actually, the people who still run the society went to a few very elite schools, even fewer very elite colleges, and they pass the ball to each other, are in charge. And those who aren't in that, if you like, class, seem to have accepted that whereas it's not a happy state of affairs, there's very little that they can do about it. Now, I'm coming up for something here, and the point I'm trying to make is that in Africa, everybody is concerned about the plight of the youth. Africa has the biggest youthful population of any continent in the world. The prospects for youth and its employment going forward are not good. People are experiencing this daily now. Quite apart from the youth, even professional, middle, and other classes in many African countries are really struggling to make ends meet. And the countries are finding it difficult to maintain a positive developmental rate of growth and so on. So um, things are very, very difficult. And of course, everybody thinks that the way to solve the problem is through politics. Western style democracy is the politics of choice, owing to the colonial background of Africa and the way in which the West has rammed it down African leaders' throats. That if you don't do this, do things our way, we remove the aid. And because we are all embedded and meshed together in a world system, it's very difficult for Africans to disengage. Now, the point about this post is that politics is only a reflection of the mentality, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of the people who engage in it. So, for example, if a class system is deeply embedded in a country, say, like the United Kingdom, it's going to be reflected in the politics that takes place. And really, the differences between the political parties, while on the surface seeming sometimes quite dramatic and quite large, you will find that the ruling classes of our countries everywhere in the world reflect the social structures which we have constructed as the people of those countries. And you'll find that things like politics reflect more the education that we received, the histories that we've been taught, true or false, uh, the science that we've been taught, again, true or false. For example, science in and of itself is only useful in the way in which we apply it. I mean, the atom's been cracked now, and it's been tested on live subjects in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But just because the atom has been cracked doesn't mean that we can go around willy nilly lobbing nukes all over. I mean, we got the capacity now to blow up our planet about 10 or 15 times over. It's obviously not good enough. Religion. Now, in the West, people aren't really that fussed about religion. Although New Age religions are coming up, people are beginning to focus more on the issues around spirituality and so on. But the established religions in the world today are suffering something of a shortfall. Pure and simple reason that whatever you call it, spirituality, religion, metaphysics, or whatever, what you practice needs to fetch up, rock up, manifest in what you do as a human being. And if you don't, then the whole thing becomes more or less something of a kind of social exercise, which is useful because it gives comfort to people when, especially when they're difficult. Right now, we're in the period of Easter. It brings society together. Families worship together under the Christian faith. There's Ramadan. There are other religious festivals. But at the end of the day, if the religion you practice does not manifest in your behavior as a human being, well, it's another social construct, isn't it? And it's not really delivering to its full, potential. One other thing, and this is a bee in the bonnet that I have personally, especially for Africa, is the position of women. I happen to come from a background in which women are actually quite powerful. Um, they're uh, they're very well educated. They're very goal orientated. They're very capable people. For some reason, they were highly respected and loved by their parents and so on. And so these are, yeah, I'm used to women who are can do people. But I don't think that that is the way culturally we address women. Now, just just do the sums. In Ghana, for example, we have a majority population which is female. You can't expect to economically disempower half the population of an economy and expect the less than 50% who remain to be empowered to look after not just themselves, but the women as well. Why don't we spread the economic largesse around, give women the respect that they deserve, so that they can bring to the party? Everybody, in my opinion, wins, especially the offspring of such women. Finally, the other thing I'd like to say is that when it comes to culture, culture is supposed to make people creative. It's supposed to teach them to engage with themselves, each other, and their environment in a way which creates value for themselves, their fellows, and the environment. But if we're stuck in cultural responses to our environment, which create retrograde or negative effects, why the devil do we continue to follow these means, behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs? I mean, culture is supposed to be fluid. What passed 1,000 years ago will not be fit for purpose today. So we are supposed to be evolving our cultures in a way that gives us the bandwidth, the freedom of mind and behavior to meet the challenges that are ever so present and which we want to address today. But at the moment, our culture becomes a little bit of a fig leaf behind which it seems that we hide. Because despite the fact that everybody wants to change, the more people want to change, the more they cling on to their cultures. And again, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this is an African phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that is global. The more people are threatened, the more they hunker down and double down into the old ways they've been used to behaving, which, as we can see through consequences in the world, is broken. Too many conflicts, too much economic dysfunction, uh, too few people controlling too many assets, too many lies being told by those who control those assets, owning the media and creating a narrative that is not true of the way our lives are. So, this is the point. I'm not going to teach my grandmother how to suck eggs. I can't tell anybody how they should live their life. I mean, what do I know? I can tell myself how to live my life. But the principles remain the same until we are prepared to countenance a change of mind, attitude, belief, and therefore behavior. We can't possibly expect there to be any change if we go to the ballot box and bring the next side in, because all that'll happen is that we'll have shifted the goalposts, um, and a different group of people will be coming in to do more or less the same things as the other people before. And so the French say, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more we change, the more we do more of the same. So this is it, my dear friends. The acid test now of everything is your behavior as a human being. We need to stop limiting people speaking their truths. The West needs to stop censoring, running away from the truths that people outside the West tell them about their experience of what's happening in the West. People in the West need to ask questions about, well, what happened in the past? Why are we doing things this way? We're looking at the evidence before our eyes. We can see that something is broken. Why don't we change our mentality? Why do we continue to double down and actually cling more tightly onto the things we've always done before? Sometimes when I look on Facebook and I see all of these, frankly, very, very pretty young women doing their twirls and dancing and their selfies and so on and so forth. And sometimes you feel it's almost as if it's an escape from reality because no matter how good you look, no matter how good the soundtrack, your little bop is is uh, is is no matter how good the soundtrack that your bop is overlaid by, um, it changes nothing. The only thing that changes anything is our mind and our consciousness. And that, my friends, is, you know, a thought I'd like to share. And I hope this really goes out. Please engage with this thing. If you see it, it'll encourage me to trust the technology even more. And, well, I won't say a word about those people who hacked my internet communications recently. Um, yeah, I'm sure they'll get their just rewards with interest, according to the law, of course, in effect. Have a good night, my friends, and happy Easter for those of you who are Christian.